Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. A very good morning to all of you. Delighted to kickstart the second day of the proceeding of our 11th edition of the GPCA Annual Forum. And inspired by the theme of this edition of the forum, I thought I would like to briefly address a couple of topics that are closely related to the central theme of this edition of the forum, namely how do we do as a regional industry on a global competitiveness level, and secondly on the growth trajectory that the industry has embarked on since the launch in the early 70s. So the first part of my brief opening remarks will focus on the growth trajectory of the regional industry. And in fact, this chart illustrates that we came, from very far, very fast. In the 70s, we were producing less than 1 million ton of chemicals. And at present, we produce over 144 million ton. This is phenomenal growth trajectory, and throughout the past 40 years or so, it has been an exponential and consistent growth pattern that the industry has taken in this part of the world, with a compounded annual growth rate ranging from 6% all the way to 18%. In the 80s. The question is, how does this benchmark on a global level? And if we look at this chart, back in 2000, we were producing 38 million ton of petrochemical. Today, in 2016, we produce 148 million ton. This is a compounded growth rate of 8.8%, which is the second highest on a global level after China. China had recorded 13.8% during this time span, and the GCC had recorded 8.8%, which is significant on a global level. Talking about the global chemical industry, the growth during this period was 4%. In our case, we've doubled the growth of the global industry during this time span. Most importantly is the fact that we've doubled our share from the global petrochemical output by volume, from 3% back in 2000 to over 7% at present. Our industry is predominantly commodity business, and on the top 10 commodity that are produced in our region, they account for 70% of the total output by volume. Specifically, those 10 top products account for over 103 million ton, which represents 70% of the total output. The global share is large and steadily growing. The lowest is for ammonia, which is 5.7%, and the highest for ethylene glycol, over 22%. Most importantly is the ethylene. Ethylene is the most versatile building block, the largest building block in our industry, and our share is significant. We account for 15.5% of the global ethylene capacity, and with the ethylene, there is significant growth with the expansion in the ethylene capacity in our region. This was accompanied by significant growth in the capacity of the ethylene derivatives, because ethylene is not exported, it's captively used in our region. And this shows you the growth in the ethylene capacity. We've added roughly 20 million ton over the past 15 years or so. From 2000, we had 4.8 million ton ethylene capacity. At present, we have 24.6 million. This represents 1.3 million per annum. So we're adding a cracker in every year of those past 15 years. As a result, our share in the ethylene derivatives in terms of production as well as in terms of trade is significant. Our share in the ethylene glycol trade, for instance, we account for 52% of the global traded ethylene glycol. In the case of polyethylene, it's 50%. So that had rendered the region the world's largest exporter of ethylene derivatives. The organic growth in our region was complemented by inorganic growth through acquisitions of several companies in key markets to get access to the market, to get access to technologies. And this journey started back in 2002 with the acquisition of DSM by SABIC, and the journey continued, throughout the years. SABIC added, several acquisition deals. In 2003, they acquired Scientific Design. In 2006, they acquired Huntsman in the UK. In 2007, the largest deal, the acquisition of GE Plastic. IPIC have done a great job by acquiring Nova Chemicals in Canada and Cepsa in Spain. Oman joined the club and acquired Oxia. Saudi Aramco also joined the club recently by acquiring 50% of Lanxess, the synthetic rubber business of Lanxess. Equate earlier this year announced the acquisition of Dow's chemical share in ME Global. On top of that, there was also several JV in key markets in Asia, namely started by Saudi Aramco back in 2007, and the Fujian Petrochemical Complex, which is a joint venture between Saudi Aramco, Fujian Petrochemical, and ExxonMobil. 2008, Kuwait Petrochemical also started a joint venture in Vietnam. SABIC in 2009 with Sinopec in China. SABIC and SK in South Korea last year, and earlier this year there was an announcement for Saudi Aramco to develop a joint venture with Petronas in Malaysia. Moving to the second part of my opening remark on the competitiveness of our industry. Looking at the sales revenue, there had been a steady increase in the sales revenue over the past 5 years, from 2010 to 2014. But due to the linkage between the chemical and the petrochemical as well, and the oil prices, the significant drop in the oil prices in the range of 60% since the peak in June 2014 resulted in a less impact on the prices of the commodity petrochemicals, ranging from 18% to 32%. And this is an evidence that is evidence to the right vision that had been set by the government in this part of the world to embark on developing the downstream for the oil and gas, developing the petrochemical industry, which is less cyclical than the oil industry. Of course, the drop in 2015 is about 10%, and this has been offset by the expansion in the capacities in our industry. How does this benchmark to the global chemical sales? The GCC over the past 5 years, 2010 to 2015, the GCC had increased the sales revenue on a compounded growth rate of 4.6%, which is slightly higher than the global compounded growth rate, which was 4.3%. But in the main conventional hub, there had been a slight drop over the same time span. In Europe, for instance, The sales revenue had dropped by 2.6%, in Latin America 2.8%, in Africa 3.1%, and in other part of the world 1.5%, which is really showing that the performance of our industry on a sales end is not bad. On the capacity utilization, which is another metrics for the performance of the industry, again, our utilization rate on average is 12% higher than the global industry's average. Of course, during the meltdown 2008, 2009, there was a drop in the capacity utilization throughout the world, and the average capacity for the global industry was in the tune of 80%, whereas the lowest in our part of the world was 92%, which really indicate that the industry is doing quite well on a global level. Our industry is a growing industry and continuing the growth journey, and this also entails that there is an expansion in the employment. As we speak, when we compare the regional industry versus the global industry over the period 2005-2015, the industry has grown in terms of the employment by a compounded annual growth rate of 6.1%, whilst the growth rate of the global industry was 2.6%, which is 3 times almost the level of the growth in the employment on a global level. On the labor productivity, taking using an index of 2005 as 100%, again, we've done quite well. Labor productivity had increased 4.7 times the level of 2005. The value added had increased 8 times, and the employment had increased by 80% over the past 5 years. Again, this indicates that the industry is continuing its growth and expansion journey. I'd like to close with a positive note, and this is related to the level of spending in the R&D. And here, as a regional industry, though from a very small base, we've done quite well. The R&D on a global level, spending in the R&D on a global level had dropped by almost 10% year-on-year basis from 2014 to 2015. And in our case, we've been steadily expanding in the spending in the R&D due to the mushrooming of R&D within our region, increasing from 300 million to over 700 million US dollar last year. On a year-on-year basis, we've increased from $529 million to $729 million. And this is really a significant growth, represent 38% year-on-year basis. And that gives us also optimism that the leadership in this industry realizing that key for competitiveness is developing the innovation capabilities within our region. And with this, I'd like to thank you all. I wish you an engaging and productive second and last day of the GPCA Annual Forum. Assalamu alaikum.